Chapter 3. Did you marry me because of Fu Jing Zhou? However, even more glaring than anything else was the marriage certificate in her hand. Almost losing control, Fu Jing Zhou snatched the marriage certificate from her hand. Upon opening it and seeing the photo inside, along with the clear characters Lu Yu, Fu Jing Zhou's lips immediately tensed. Veins throbbed silently on his forehead. His knuckles showed a hint of bluish-white. Su Wan Ci, how dare you? These few words seemed to be squeezed out of his throat. The malevolence behind them was as if he wanted to tear her apart the next moment. However, the woman in front of him wasn't afraid. It wasn't until he almost tore the marriage certificate apart that she finally spoke slowly. If you tear it, that would be perfect. My marriage to Lu Yu will last a lifetime. A clear crease appeared on the marriage certificate where it had been gripped tightly. Hearing Su Wan Ci's words, he ultimately didn't tear it apart. The atmosphere in the room turned eerily tense. Yet, after just 2 seconds, a ringing phone shattered the tension. Seeing the unmarked number flashing on the screen, Su Wan Ci paused for a second and then answered the call. A clear and deep voice came through the line. Which floor? Su Wan Ci lowered her gaze. 8th floor. After her response, the call was ended. However, the next second there was a knock on the door behind her. Without even glancing at Fu Jing Zhou, Su Wan Ci turned to open the door. Fu Jing Zhou quickly stepped forward, grabbing her wrist and forcefully pulling her into his arms. Xiao Ci. His voice lowered, containing a barely perceptible quiver. Su Wan Ci didn't struggle any further. Instead, she looked up at him, her tone devoid of any waves. Mr. Fu, after all the progress you've made, do you really want to tear your face apart and become enemies with the Lu family? Fu Jingzhou's palm paused. The knocking outside the door continued, now mixed with impatience. Taking advantage of his momentary distraction, Su Wan Ci decisively pushed him away. She turned to open the door. Outside the door, Lu Yu had the car keys in his hand. He was leaning against the wall casually, his expression lazy. When he saw Fu Jingzhou inside, his dark and narrow eyes slightly squinted without leaving any trace. He stood up straight, his gaze full of meaning as he glanced at Fu Jingzhou before shifting his attention to Su Wan Ci. Wife. Is this apartment yours or Mr. Fu's? He asked knowingly. Su Wan Ci looked up at him. Mine. A smile appeared in Lu Yu's eyes. He stretched out his long arm and pulled her waist into an embrace. Su Wan Ci's body instinctively tensed. Lu Yu looked down at her. She tried to relax, not showing any signs of resistance on her face. However, when Fu Jingzhou heard Lu Yu call her wife, a hint of uncontrollable anger flashed in his eyes. Seeing the girl he had raised so obediently now leaning in another man's embrace, the anger in his heart couldn't be suppressed and grew stronger. But Lu Yu seemed oblivious to Fu Jingzhou's dark expression. Embracing his young wife, he spoke leisurely. Mr. Fu has a distinguished status. Coming to Mrs. Lu's apartment at night, what would others think? Perhaps they'd assume Mr. Fu is trying to seduce a married woman. He appeared casual, but his words were a mix of jest and warning. Fu Jingzhou endured and endured, watching as she was pulled into someone else's arms right in front of him. The anger within him not only didn't fade, but it burned even brighter. Mr. Lu, everyone in Shangqing knows that Su Wan Ci belongs to me. Is that so? Lu Yu's lips curled into a faint smile. He lowered his head and looked at the quiet girl in his arms. Unfortunately, starting now, Su Wan Ci belongs to me, Lu Yu. As my wife. As he spoke, he raised his head to look at Fu Jingzhou, who was obviously struggling to contain his anger. Then his gaze dropped to the marriage certificate in Fu Jingzhou's hand, which had been creased a few times. Since Mr. Fu has both mine and my wife's marriage certificate, I assume he's also aware that tonight is our wedding night. Chapter 3, Did you marry me because of Fu Jing Zhou? Continued. Lu Yu released Su Wan Ci and took a step forward. The invisible gazes of two equally powerful men intersected in the air. Like fire meeting ice, the atmosphere suddenly shifted. The bridal chamber is adorned with candles. And a moment of spring night is worth 1,000 gold. Mrs. Lu and I won't keep Mr. Fu up all night discussing things. As he spoke, he reached out and snatched the marriage certificate from Fu Jing Zhou's hand. Without handing it back to Su Wan Ci, he simply placed it in his own pocket. Mrs. Lu, let's go. He turned to the side, looking at the silent Su Wan Ci. Seeing the hand in front of her, Su Wan Ci's eyelashes trembled twice, and she raised her hand to cover it. Lu Yu grasped her hand and led her away. At the door, he stopped, not looking back, and said, "Since the beauty is in my arms, I won't delay any longer. Please close the door when Mr. Fu leaves." After saying this, he took Su Wan Ci into the elevator. Back in the apartment, Fu Jingzhou's face was not looking good. And the joints of his fingers emitted a bone-chilling sound. Downstairs, the Koenigsegg drove away. The neon streetlights flew by outside the window. The atmosphere inside the car was inexplicably heavy, and the enclosed space made breathing feel constrained. Su Wan Ci lowered one of the car windows, allowing the cool breeze of early autumn to come in. It played with the soft strands of hair near her eyebrows and eyes. At a red light, Koenigsegg stopped at the waiting area. Lu Yu's fingers rested on the steering wheel as he looked at Su Wan Ci. Sensing this unignorable gaze, Su Wan Ci turned her head to meet it. She thought he might ask her about the situation between her and Fu Jing Zhou, but Lu Yu asked a different question. "Have you had dinner?" The girl paused, then shook her head. Lu Yu tucked the loose strands of hair behind her ear and gently kissed her on the lips. Xiangqing's traffic lights had varying durations for red lights. Just as Lu Yu was about to taste that feeling, the light turned green. The honking behind them urged them to move. Lu Yu released her, stepped on the gas pedal, and headed back to Huiding Mansion. By now, it was close to 8 in the evening. The sky had darkened, and due to Lu Yu dismissing the servants, only a few warm lights illuminated the lawn in front of the mansion's entrance. Looking at the neon Huiding on the top of the villa, Su Wan Ci's fingertips tightened. Especially after Lu Yu's words in the cafe during the day and in the apartment in the evening, these words were unconsciously replaying in her mind. Turning off the car, Lu Yu got out of the car, opened the door for Su Wan Ci, and pulled her out. At the entrance of Huiding Mansion, he used his fingerprint to unlock the door and then recorded Su Wan Ci's fingerprint. Huiding Mansion was Lu Yu's private place, and all the decorations inside were based on state-of-the-art high-tech intelligence. Sensing the master's return, the villa automatically turned on all the lights inside. Su Wan Ci looked inside. The main color was a combination of gray and white, simple yet grand and luxurious. Not to mention the most high-end furniture, even the casually hung painting on the wall was worth millions. The Lu family was indeed a renowned aristocratic family in Xiangqing for several hundred years. As she calmed down, Su Wan Ci couldn't help but think. Was her impulsive decision to marry Lu Yu today right or wrong? Rest for a while. I'll go cook. Before Su Wan Ci could sort out her thoughts, a deep voice reached her ears. Before she could respond, Lu Yu was already in the kitchen. It seemed like ever since she had seen Fu Jing Zhou earlier, Lu Yu had been somewhat quiet. Of course, it might also be due to her spending most of her time studying abroad, resulting in limited understanding of him. Lu Yu quickly prepared 3 dishes and a soup. As they ate dinner, when they were almost finished, he suddenly asked, "Did you marry me because of Fu Jing Zhou?" Su Wan Ci clenched the chopsticks in her hand. She looked up at him. Under the warm yellow light, Lu Yu's expression was dark and inscrutable. Looking at the gaze she returned, he asked again, Am I just your shield?